Next up, we're diving into our module with the new leisure rules on tribalism, which is really about people's desire to connect with one another. And here we're really going to explore how this changed throughout the course of the pandemic and how we expect it to evolve post-pandemic as well. And tribalism is really about our desire to connect and engage with and interact with people who have shared values or specific interests in common with us as well. The driver here is really one of connection, which is, of course, hardwired into all human beings. Now, if we're talking about connection, especially in the scope of the last year, we also have to talk about loneliness, which, as you can imagine, has been on the uptick since the pandemic began. Now, one thing to clarify and to, I think, just have a little bit more nuance around is that loneliness is actually a state of mind, and it can occur even when you have a great deal of social interaction. There's a huge health risk associated with loneliness. In fact, specifically, there was a 26% chance of premature mortality associated with loneliness. And I know we've heard so much about contagions over the past year, so I won't harp on this too much, but there's actually being research done to study whether loneliness is actually contagious and can move throughout social groups. Now, what I like to think of as the antidote or the opposite feeling of loneliness is something called collective effervescence. This was a term coined by Emil Durkheim, and it really refers to that euphoria you experience when you're doing something at the same time in a huge group of people. It's this intense feeling of belonging, and it's actually very hard to replicate. Now, of course, over the past year, we haven't had the chance to gather in these huge groups, or at least most of us haven't been lucky enough to, which is why I like to say that we're experiencing a bit of a collective effervescence deficit right now. Now, many brands and many organizations have addressed the loneliness that's come along with the pandemic in very direct ways, which we see in this insight. The most intense iteration that I've seen is called Human Minute. I tried this out myself, so I can attest to how intense it is. And how it works is you show up at 2 p.m. on this website, they pair you with somebody else, and you basically stare at them through your webcam without saying anything and without making any facial expressions. So really getting to the core of what we're trying to accomplish here, but of course, it's not really for everyone. Now, for those looking for a more fun and perhaps a little bit more lighthearted approach to bonding with others over the internet, there's of course social gaming, which has really reached new heights over the past year. Now, the myth of the lonely gamer playing in solitude is dead, as declared by the Washington Post. And I think if you're still thinking of gamers as loners, you really need to update your thinking and kind of look around at what's happening in that space. Because there's even companies like Beta Dwarf who are running specific projects that actually are using gaming as a way to alleviate loneliness. This company specifically is creating a new genre called friendshipping games, where you are not only incentivized to make new friends, but actually maintain those friendships over time as well. We see a lot of brands getting more involved in the gaming world in general. We've seen kind of the equivalent to a pop-up experience within games themselves. One of my favorite examples of this is the in-game movie night from Fortnite, where depending on where you were located, you got a different movie. But you would show up and watch a movie with all of these virtual avatars who were, of course, real people behind the screen. And what was interesting is in an article I read about this, some people described it as better than going to the real movies. But I have to say you should take that with a grain of salt, because those people further explained that this was because you could throw tomatoes at the movie screen and mute your fellow moviegoers, which has kind of really always been the dream, hasn't it? Now, I would say that the biggest force that we've seen take place in entertainment, and as it pertains to tribalism, is really nostalgia, which has been around for a number of years, but is kind of reaching new heights as of late. And that's because nostalgia is not only a shortcut to comfort, because we're familiar with these things, it's also a powerful shortcut to connection as well. Now, we've seen this take place through things like the Versus Instagram live battles, where we see various hip hop and R&B legends really celebrate their catalogs in a very interactive way. But the one I want to focus on today is the Secret Sofa experience put on by Haagen-Dazs and Secret Cinema. So Secret Cinema, if you're not familiar with it, is an immersive theater company based in the UK. They are famous for their incredible movie-themed events that take place typically in London, but sometimes other places as well. And they basically moved those experiences online at the beginning of the pandemic. So every Friday night, they would have a chosen movie that is beloved by many. And they created this Facebook group where people would bond over the movie, watch it at the same time, and also dress up, which is a huge part of the typical Secret Cinema experience. So I took part in a lot of these experiences for research and also just because I'm a huge fan. And, I was amazed at the kind of costumes I saw on the Facebook group. Like, people really went all out. And I had a bit of FOMO. I unfortunately moved at the beginning of the pandemic, which was awful. I don't recommend that to anyone. But because of that, I didn't have a lot of my clothes or really anything of mine that I could partake with. So at a certain point after a couple of these events, I guess I started dressing up potatoes in the style of these movies. This is my Moulin Rouge potato. I hope you like her. And I just want to remind you that this was firmly in the crisis stage of the pandemic. So we're doing a lot better now. Thank you for asking. All jokes aside, other than nostalgia, what do these experiences that I just talked about have in common? Well, the thing that they have in common is that they take place in real time and require that real life subsequent and coordinated participation. And that's because the most successful tribalism experiences in general happen in real time. The takeaway from this is that, of course, these digital experiences help a little bit, but the bottom line is that the data kind of shows that they're not really a replacement for in-person connection, not even close. So while these are great and exciting, we do feel that when it is safe to do so, people are going to be really excited to get out there and have these in-person collective effervescence experiences in full. When it comes to creating the future with tribalism in mind, when it is safe to socialize, there will likely be a pent-up demand for in-person connection. Due to financial setbacks, however, many consumers will be looking for more cost-effective options. And lastly, so long as we're facing great uncertainty, nostalgia will likely play a bigger and bigger role in entertainment than usual. So that wraps up our new leisure module number 2 on the role of tribalism. Here are some questions for you to consider. What are some ways your brands could leverage nostalgia to create a sense of togetherness? And what are some ways in which you could bring people together safely? What would it look like if that experience had to be touchless?